Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Homegrown Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Harker, and today we're diving into a powerful new research study from TNTP called the Opportunity Makers. This work explores how schools across the country are helping students catch up and thrive, especially those who've been historically underserved. This is the first of a four-part series, so be sure to like and follow the Kindle Podcast Network so you don't miss a thing. Joining me today is Dr. Whitney Newton, a partner from TNTP, fellow Hoosier, and a former teacher. Yay, teachers. We love teachers. And she's going to be here to help us unpack the findings and share what it means for educators in the state of Indiana. So welcome, Whitney, to the show.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
We're excited that you're here. I always love it when a former teacher or I can get a teacher on the show because right away you've got street cred.
Right? I hope so.
Right? Former teacher. I do always like to start my podcast talking just briefly, a quick second about your schooling and what your school was like, because I think it gives us a good kind of shared moment, shared past. Mm-hmm. We've all been to school, right? So what was school like for you?
I really enjoyed school. I'm a big reader and have been since the moment I could put a book together and do it on my own. My mom was a grade school teacher actually in Pike Township, which is where I went to school.
Did you have her in school?
No, I didn't. Okay. She taught K-1-2 special education, but at the same school in elementary school that I went to. I went to Eastbrook with her there. And so that really shaped my experience. My parent was in the building. All of my teachers knew her. Sometimes she would stop by. She often caught me in math class with my book under the desk, reading. So yeah, no, but I had a really great experience. I had so many amazing teachers. And going into high school at Pike High School, I was fortunate enough to play for the soccer team and was in show choir. And so I just feel like I had a really blessed experience, K-12, and some incredible teachers. Top of the list, Donna Craycraft, my ELA teacher for 2 years in high school. She's the reason that I was able to finish my PhD. She's the reason that I'm still a writer to this day. She made me a better writer the 2 years that I got to have her in high school. So yeah, I loved school. I liked the to-do lists, and I liked the grades, and I liked getting to learn new things. So yeah, it was a good experience for me.
That's great. Yeah, I love a good story. Your story about her catching you with the book.
Yep.
My wife and I were both teachers, but we never taught in the same school as our kids.
Okay.
So we kind of checked up on them a little bit, but we weren't able to just walk in the classroom like that. That would have been golden, I think.
Yeah.
So, right. So let's start in talking about the Opportunity Makers research.
Sure.
And let's start big picture, kind of an overview. So what is it? What's the research? And why are we doing this?
Yeah. So I'll go back a little further even into TNTP's history as an organization. So TNTP is a national nonprofit. We've been around for over 20 years. And initially, our theory of change was rooted in the teacher. The teacher is the most important in-school factor in a student's life. And that's still true. We still believe that that's true. However, we also know from spending so much time on the teacher as the change factor early in our organization's time that teachers cannot do their job well if the system does not support them in doing the things that matter for students. And so as we've learned about the most effective classroom practices, our sphere of influence started to expand, moved into principal coaching and supports, moved into instructional coaching and supports, school supports, and now a lot of the work we do is really at the system level to help create the conditions for great teaching in the classroom for kids. Teacher is still the most important in school factor, and there are so many pieces that are necessary for teachers to thrive in the classroom and allow their students to thrive. So with that in mind, this research is coming after we released a report in 2018 called The Opportunity Myth, which explores the four requirements inside of a classroom for students to be learning and engaged. It's a great research paper. Feel free to look back at it. The Opportunity Myth, it's on our website. But post that research, we realized, from classroom to classroom, things can look very different, and students can be getting a very different experience from one class to the next. So our question became, where are the schools where no matter which classroom you're in, no matter which teacher you get, as a student, you have a great experience and you learn what you need to learn to thrive and to make the choices you want for yourself. So that's where this research started to come out of, was us asking that question of, can we find some schools where consistently, no matter which classroom you enter, students are learning at the level that they deserve to be learning at. And so that was pre-pandemic. We planned this research, 2019. And then the pandemic hit. We took a hard pivot, did a bunch of research on learning acceleration, really tried to put out for schools and teachers like real just-in-time resources to help them combat some of the learning loss and just the emotional supports that were necessary for all of us while we were, dealing with a global pandemic. And as we started to do more research in classrooms, we saw that our story about what's happening as a result of the pandemic and how learning acceleration is playing out, we realized, oh, actually, this school level best practices research it's even more important. So we made a few tweaks to the research questions and then jumped in. This is a story. So the Opportunity Makers research is a story of the schools, the 5%. So in the United States, 5% of schools, we saw the cohorts of students achieving and growing as a group over time, over 10 years. This is a story about those bright spots. This could have been a story about the 95% of schools that are struggling, but we intentionally wanted to look at, where is it going well? Where are kids really thriving? Where are you seeing that the system itself is working for kids at the school level? So that's really where it came from, where we've come, and then now why we decided to pursue it post-pandemic. It seemed even more valuable for the field to learn more about schools that are truly changing the trajectory of students' lives.
I love that you started talking about systems
Yeah,
rather than classrooms, because we have a lot of great teachers, but they're
that's right.
teaching in a system that doesn't value that kind of work
That's right.
necessarily all the time. And so it's hard for us to find them sometimes.
Yep.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about in the report about trajectory changing schools. That's a mouthful.
Yeah, a little
I'm going
bit.
to say it again, trajectory changing schools.
Mm-hmm.
And I also love that we're talking about the 5% and not the 95%, because we hear all the
Yep,
time about the 95%.
that's right.
Um, so what does it mean to be a trajectory changing school, and how do we
Yeah.
identify those?
Yeah. So I'll talk about how we identified them, and I want to be clear up front. Trajectory changing, in quotes, is our organization's designation for selection and research purposes. It helps us talk about best practices, what's a trajectory changing best practice at the school level, but there's no like threshold at which a school is not trajectory changing and now they become trajectory changing. That is not what we've done. So I want to be clear about that. Any school, anywhere, can have and be implementing trajectory changing practices for students. In our study, though, to identify the N size that we wanted to look at, we worked backwards from the CETA data, or it's the Stanford Educational Data. I'm going to say it wrong. Stanford Education Data Archive. So it's publicly available. And first we looked at the 13,000 schools where students as a cohort were making 1.33 years of growth in 1 year or more. So this is consistent student achievement, consistent cohort growth. We saw schools that had spikes, very significant spikes in achievement results during a 10-year span. Most of those were for a variety of reasons that weren't about practices. We saw dips happen after assessment changes. Maybe a leader changed and completely shook up the staff, or there was a change to the school model, or even the districting of the school changed and the student population changed, but the school itself looked like the achievement results had changed. So we wanted to look at, where is it true that consistently over 10 years, without a major shift in one of these sort of outlying factors, achievement was consistent for student groups. So we screened out any schools that show trajectory changing practices or trajectory changing growth in the aggregate, but it was driven primarily by a single subgroup. So, for example, a school that suddenly adopted a gifted and talented program that previously didn't have it. We screened those schools out. And then of those 1,300 schools that we were looking at, we selected for geographically diverse. So this was a national study. We selected for various school models. So we looked at traditional charter, rural, and urban schools. And then we had to determine who was willing to participate, who could share data, who would allow us to spend time there with their teachers and inside their schools. We spent several weeks in each of these schools. We really wanted to be on the ground, so it was a commitment for those schools. So that's sort of how we came to the trajectory changing schools. These are schools that, from the CETA data, make more 1.33 years of growth or more for a cohort of students over 10 years, barring some, outlying factor that might have caused that achievement to spike for some reason.
So this is not something that you just decided on a whim and said,
No.
hey, let's go do this. This is years of work and planning that have gone into this. So you're in the schools, you do all of this work, all of this research. What did you find? What did you find that maybe surprised you?
Sure.
Or was there something that kind of was really unexpected?
Yeah, there was actually. So right off the bat, I think, our assumption going in was that we would see these like very what you traditionally imagine as like a very put together school. We're going to see perfect instruction. We're going to see quiet hallways. We're going to see, schools where they keep their teachers for 30 years. The teachers never leave. And that is not what we saw. These were very normal, typical schools. They were struggling with the same teacher shortages, budget constraints, mandates from their central office that any school we might see. And we didn't see perfect instruction, to be clear, and we'll talk about that more when we get to consistency, but we saw good instruction. We saw a lot of like, a 7 or 8 out of 10. We saw a few 10 out of 10 lessons, but what surprised us the most was what was consistently true across these schools is we very rarely saw below a 5 out of 10 lesson. All the lessons, the floor for a good lesson at these schools, we never dropped below the floor for in the classroom in terms of the good instruction, grade level material students were engaging in. So I really think the summary there is that like perfect, we say this all the time in coaching and teaching, but perfect is the enemy of good. We were expecting to see these like perfect schools doing all of the silver bullet strategies that everyone says, and that's not what we saw. We saw perfectly normal schools, but where the floor for instruction was kept by everybody there. The only thing the same, though, this is the other thing that was surprising too, because the other thing we were wondering is like, okay, maybe they all adopted the same curriculum, or maybe they all are using or really implementing PBIS really similarly, and it's just really like landed with students for some reason. The only thing the same about these schools were their results over 10 years. The concepts that came from these schools are all the same that we're going to talk about. So the 3 concepts we see, 3 conditions were belonging, consistency, and coherence. Those were the same conceptually, but the methods that the schools put into practice and how they made these conditions true for students all looked very different from school to school. So it was surprising, honestly, to see the very typical schools, but they had these very key beliefs or consistent practices that they were implementing.
That is surprising to me as well. I would
Yeah.
have expected to see, and you used the word traditional, a lot
Yeah.
of traditional practices, although I'm not sure why, because I don't think traditional is the best way to teach. But
Yeah.
for some reason, I don't know, it's ingrained, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, that is really, really surprising. So we're going to get to it, but it begs the question then, if all of these schools are so different, how do we define what works? How do
Yeah.
we define how they're getting the results that they're getting if they're all
Yeah.
so different? And so, so you reported out on three highlights: belonging, consistency, and coherence. And you've
Yeah.
used those words a couple of times already. So talk us through kind of what each of those means in practice.
Sure. I'll give you our very formal definitions first, and then we can talk about them a little bit. But our definition of belonging is schools create an emotional climate for learning that activates students' ability to excel. Consistency, schools deliver consistently good teaching and grade level content for all students. And then coherence. Schools build a unified instructional program and set priorities that are clear to all. And by all, we mean all students, adults,
All,
parents,
everybody,
caregivers, everyone who's involved in the school.
everybody in the community.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yep. Yep. Another piece that I think is important to name about these three conditions is that change in one inevitably leads to change in the other. These are three concepts that bubbled up across all of these schools, but they're very closely connected. So they work together. Students experience these three things as a holistic day, like day in the life. They're all three happening sometimes across the same experience for a student might hit all three of these conditions from their perspective. And then therefore the impacts compound over time. So, for example, a student experiencing more consistent, predictable grade level instruction creates the conditions for the program to feel more coherent to them while cultivating a sense of safety in the classroom. They know what to expect. It's consistent every day. That sort of like cyclical nature of this, I think, is important. When we are working with schools who are trying to build their trajectory changing practices, we often see people like, okay, we're going to tackle all three all at the same time. And it's like, no, that's not going to work. You're going to burn everybody out, kids included. We pick one practice, one condition, and we work to define and implement some practices that support that particular condition. By doing that, though, we will lift the other two. It's just that we're focusing on the one at the time.
Yeah, and I'm betting or I'm imagining that as you work on one, the teachers start to question and say, well, but now this doesn't work over here. Now I have to change this over here
Yep.
because this doesn't work now.
Yep.
And I have to build this up. Oh, but now I have to do this over here because it doesn't
Yep.
fit right. And they end up working on all of it, but it doesn't feel overwhelming to them.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. So so let's dig into each one of these just briefly.
Sure.
Because I know in our other series, the rest of the series, we're
Yes.
going to be really unpacking all of these in depth. But just to give our listeners a little bit better taste, why is belonging so foundational? And what does it look like? What does belonging look? Because that's kind of a vague-ish kind of word.
Yes. Yes. So remember, I said the definition was that schools create an emotional climate for learning that activates students' ability to excel. So a belonging, supportive environment activates students' learning, right? It's a prerequisite. And that's something as teachers, many of us know, and in part, a lot of us went into teaching because of the sense of wanting to create a safe classroom environment where students felt like they belonged. At the school level, though, which remember when we're talking about trajectory changing schools, these pieces that are activating students' learning are structural and relational. Oftentimes, when we talk about belonging, we're only talking about that relationship. Like every kid has an adult that they can go to that cares about them. Yes, that's necessary. That is a part of belonging, but it's only a piece of it. The other piece is that there are structures in place so that kids are known by the system and kids are seen by the system for what they are capable of. And they're supported by the system because they're seen when they're falling behind or struggling. So, one of the key things we saw in all of these schools was that all the trajectory changing schools was they designed support systems for each individual student. They had set up structures to build a full understanding of each young person, both in and out of school. And then they worked in their teams, however those teams were cut, sometimes grade level, sometimes by content, to support their students' unique needs. They looked beyond proficiency as in a single year. This is really important. This showed up in every school too. They're looking at the student's proficiency over multiple years, and they're aiming to see that student reach a grade level change over time. So the students have a clear path to improve, and we're building the confidence for them to actually walk that path with us as a support for them. So that's
Nobody,
belonging.
nobody falls through the cracks.
Exactly.
There's because it sounds like with this, there's no cracks to fall through.
Right. It's really strong netting under
Yeah,
everyone.
yeah, that's awesome. So let's move on to then consistency was the second area that you found. And it sounds very technical,
Mhm.
but it seems to be just about instruction, just
Sort of.
making sure we're not, all over the place.
Yeah.
So what are
Yeah,
schools
I think
doing to be more consistent?
yeah, it comes back to what I said earlier about perfect being the enemy of good. What we saw in these schools was that teachers were delivering consistently good lessons. They were rarely great. They were sometimes great, not always. They were never bad. It was very rare that the lesson was a bad lesson. So, not first and foremost, we know, and we've talked a lot about this in Indiana with our literacy initiatives for the last couple of years, but grade level instruction, students experiencing instruction that is on grade level for them at tier 1 is non-negotiable. That has to be happening for every child. And in these schools, there was a school-wide expectation and a structure in place for teachers to utilize the shared materials that their district had chosen or that their school had chosen. One caveat, and I might get in a little trouble for this, not every one of our schools had chosen high quality materials yet. Some of them were not using what would be on the ed reports list of like green high quality, but they were using shared resources that they had all agreed to, and everyone was digging into them, processing them, internalizing them, and then delivering them in a strong lesson, in a strong way. The primary vehicle here that we saw most of the schools using was either a PLC process or another sort of sacred data meeting. The PLCs, and this gets into like how the things are overlapping, these conditions are overlapping. They were very student oriented. Students were talked about by name. Their progress week to week were agenda items in these PLCs or data meetings. There were never district announcements on agendas. These were protected, sacred meetings to discuss student progress. Then teachers would leave their PLC or their meeting and they would go and take action based on what they had learned that same day or the next day. And so again, it's where we talked before about there's netting underneath students. That's a part of belonging, and there was a structure in place, but it was also directly tied to the lesson and the consistent instruction because it was very clear that teachers were ensuring that every student was getting that grade level instruction and support. So we talked about like it's raising the floor.
Yeah, and that tier one instruction, I
Yep.
love that non-negotiable piece
Yep.
because it's so important. When I talk to teachers all the time that give a test and they 50% of their kids are doing poorly, and that's not that doesn't become a tier two intervention then for
Right.
50% of your kids. That means
Right.
there's something wrong with our tier one instruction.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to beef that up. So I love that that's where your focus is. That's
Yep.
really, really important.
Yep.
Um, moving on to the third
Yeah.
piece of the tripod here, and that is coherence. And I think of
Mhm.
the three, it's probably the word just on the surface that I would know the least about. I would have the least
Okay.
connection to. I would have the least amount of prior knowledge about. When someone just says the word coherence, it doesn't automatically bring up some vision in my mind. So talk us through that. How do schools achieve this
Yep.
coherence?
Yep.
And really tell us a little bit more about what is it?
Yeah, and when we do the coherence section of this series, we'll get very deeply into the especially academic coherence. So, but for now, what I want to name, first of all, it's very challenging for a teacher by themselves to be implementing coherence as a structure or a condition. This is the most school wide of the three conditions because it anchors tier one as the most important aspect of instructional programming and priorities. And then from tier one, tier two, and tier three, and tutoring and at home programs and supports are chosen as they directly connect to and support the tier one instruction that's happening at that time. That's what's most important. And it is not in a teacher's time or energy or wheelhouse to be choosing all of those programs on their own. That is something that comes from your school or your district or your network. So we didn't go in when we were looking at these schools. We didn't actually we didn't have a word for it either, to be honest. But we realized as we were studying these schools that all of the aspects of the student's experience at school were very well connected. And everyone, the students, caregivers, teachers, and leaders, could all articulate each of those pieces of instruction, how they were connected. It was clear that they were looking at their school day from the student's perspective and saying, how can we make this make sense for a kid? As they walk from English class or reading class, and then they go see an interventionist, and then they step into after school tutoring or they get pulled out at lunch, and then they're typing on their little English program at home when they get home to do their after school work. Do all those things feel connected for that child? Does it make sense to them, or are they just like getting random acts of instruction that various people who don't talk to each other have chosen for them? So, but like I said, when we get into coherence, we'll talk about one student in particular, Ethan, who we followed very closely at Charleston Elementary, and his experience and how it changed from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. It's a really cool story.
That's really intriguing to me. Um, and it supports this idea of, you said, a really good safety net.
Yep.
Um, I've talked to teachers and said things like, well, maybe we should refer them to RTI. And then the teacher
Mm,
says, well, I don't know what to do there. I don't know how to do that. And so that's an example of where the teacher's not able to articulate the system that they're in.
yeah.
And so, of course, it's not going to function well for that student who needs services if their teachers
Right.
don't even know how to administer those services or get
Yep.
them connected to those services. So I love this idea of the safety net and very
Yeah.
tightly woven.
Hmm.
That sounds very, very exciting to me that
Yeah.
there are schools out there doing that. So how can educators, teachers, district leaders, coaches, anybody in that realm, start applying these ideas in their own contexts?
Yeah.
What's the next step for them?
For sure. And I'm going to specifically talk about teachers first and want to name that we were looking at schools and the best case scenario is a team, right? That as a unit, a team, a grade level, or a content area working to put these into practice together is going to have the biggest impact on the most students. If you can push it to the school level, even better, right? But for a teacher, first and foremost, teachers can be doing a pulse check on their students' experience at school, both within their classroom, but also within the full day. If a teacher themselves has a strong understanding of how students or an individual student is experiencing their school day, especially looking at students furthest from opportunities, that teacher can then make very clear and data driven recommendations to their school administration. Any of these practices can happen at any level, but everyone at their school understanding the student experience from the student's perspective is where the change will really start to make a difference for all kids. We have to remember our students show up at school and they do not get to pick what they work on. They show up and they are told what to do. And what we saw in our previous research in opportunity myth is the vast majority of students show up to school and do what they're asked to do. They really do. They are there to learn and they want to learn. But if our system is not set up to give them a coherent experience from class to class, from class to intervention, it becomes challenging for them to follow the thread, to follow the point throughout the day. So that's the first thing. Try to understand the experience that your students are having within the school throughout the day. Second, then a teacher could spend some time reflecting on where are you and where are your school lining up on the non-negotiables that we name in the research paper? And can you then advocate for better practices? Making sure, is every student seeing grade level work at tier 1, period, non-negotiable? How can we make sure that that's happening? Are your tier 2 and tier 3 experiences expressly matching up with the tier 1 instruction that happened that day or that week? And how can we make sure that that's happening? And when it's not happening, and we know it's not either from the student experience or because we can clearly see, like, I was delivering tier 2 interventions and they're for the stuff we did last week. I'm not intervening on the struggles students had today or yesterday or this week. Then call it out. Say, this isn't best practice. Name it for your team or for your administration. So here's an example for belonging. And again, it crosses multiple of the conditions, but hopefully this crystallizes it. So your school as a building might not have school-wide belonging structures, but your grade level, let's say you teach 4th grade, could ensure that every single person on your 4th grade team has a set of touch points that cover all of your students. So breakfast time, we've got our list. Here's who we check in with at breakfast time. Lunchtime, we've got our list. Recess, we've got our list. On the way out the door, we've got our list. And throughout the day or throughout the week, depending on, size of team, size of classes, size of school, every single student gets some kind of touch point with someone on your team. And the touch point is about, like, maybe it's a very quick, like, how was school today? Sure, that's great. And if we can be asking them about the academic program itself and their experience, and when we go into the belonging blog, we'll share some toolkits that we have available for teachers on our websites that have some surveys you can give, have some key questions you can ask to be starting to understand whether structures are working for kids. And then, the school itself, there are so many things that a school can be doing to put these conditions into place, especially setting up that PLC system and ensuring that teachers have protected sacred time to talk about their students and the instruction that they're providing. And we know something we learned in this research that I think is important to name. We saw, 1,300 trajectory changing schools. We closely studied 7 of those. We saw no trajectory changing systems. There were no district level or network level systems where multiple schools in the same system were acting as trajectory changing agents for a larger group of kids. And I think that's important to name, not because it's not possible, but because it presents a really interesting opportunity for districts to be thinking about how can they be, as a district level person, setting the conditions for multiple schools to be putting these conditions into place for classrooms, sort of that vertical spine of the district itself. So if you're a district level person listening, we are partnering with lots of districts across the country right now, doing more research, trying to deeply understand what are trajectory changing practices at the district level. We're also reading about, district transformation. There's a great book, From Tinkering to Transformation by Honig and Rainey, that several of my colleagues and I are reading right now to learn more about how our districts that have worked really hard to transform so that they meet teaching and learning's priorities, no matter who you are, what office you sit in. So I think there's any of us at any level of a district, whether you're at the classroom level or you're sitting in the cabinet, there are things you can be doing and learning and to understand the student experience through the day.
I'm reading a book right now, and in it talks about doing interviews with kids at the beginning of
Yes.
the year. And not necessarily all your kids, but those that you need, that you know need some extra support. But
Yep.
the interview questions were right in line with what you
Yep.
were talking about, saying things or asking things like, when you walk into your math classroom, how do you feel?
Yep.
What kind of activities help you feel supported? What do you think is working for you? What do you think is not working for you? And it's just getting at that student experience,
Yep.
not just do you like school or do you not like school? Eh,
Yep.
you know. So yeah, I I really made a connection there to those interviews. I'm going to be
Mm.
suggesting that to some teachers next throughout
I
the
love it.
semester here. So as we think about um, wrapping up our time, what
Sure.
tools or resources do you have, does TNTP offer to help schools kind of take action? If somebody's listening to this podcast and says, that is exactly what we need to do, we're all
Yep.
over the place, we need to all get on the same page. What can they begin doing? What can they look at?
Yeah, so on our website, which we'll have linked in the podcast info, our TNTP has a online place where you can read the research, and I think that's a good place to start, especially if you are a research policy wonk like me, and you like to read all the things coming out. But we also have a baseline assessment, and I think this is a great place for folks to start, especially if they're like, I want to bring this to my PLC next week. I want to bring my fourth grade team along with me and learning what's happening. So you take that baseline assessment together and then you start with what you're good at. That's, I think, the other thing to note here is what we were looking at schools that were doing these trajectory changing practices well. You should do the same. Take a look at what's going well and really try to hone in and refine those practices so that they become structural and consistent from day to day to day. I think that's a really good place for teams to start. We don't have to start at the thing. We tell our students this too, right? We don't have to start at the thing we're the worst at and just beat ourselves up to see progress and to see change. So I think that's one way to approach this, and one way that I certainly would want to do it if I were in the classroom now. That's how I would do it. Alongside that baseline assessment, there are a ton of toolkits. So there are toolkits for educators, toolkits for principals. There's also toolkit if you're a parent and a teacher maybe listening to this, there's toolkits for parents and caregivers as well for how you can be asking good questions of your school or accessing the resources that your school provides to make sure your students' experience when they get home is connected to their tier one instruction. There's a ton of stuff there on our website, so we'll make that available to everybody after this. And then keep listening and reading. We'll have blogs, we'll have some more podcasts. Stay tuned to the Kindle network because we'll be sharing more about the research over the next 6 months.
Absolutely. Yes, tune in, follow, like, do all those things. So, what's the end game here with the
Mm,
state of Indiana? What you're partnering with Keep Indiana Learning,
yep.
and we're so excited about that. So, what's the end game? What's the takeaway that we want the teachers in Indiana to have?
Yeah, I mean, I said it at the beginning, but there's no arbitrary bar for a school to become trajectory changing. Any school can be implementing trajectory changing practices right away, tomorrow. Right. And so, my number one, my hope always when we have a research project that TNTP releases is that we share what we've learned with as many people as possible. We have a really strict research protocol that we follow. And any of the research that you see TNTP put out, it's genuinely really good research. And it's part of why I work here now. I saw the opportunity myth come out in 2018 and was like, oh my gosh, I want to be a part of the people that are researching how practices are working in education for kids. So I want to share it and make sure teachers know it's there. And then I mean from there, I think when systems are working together in rowing in the same direction, it lifts the boat for all kids. And that's why I'm in this work, is to see students get to reach their own goals and achieve the things they want to achieve in their life. And so ultimately for me, it comes back to the students. And so if I can give an educator or a principal one small thing to change tomorrow that impacts one single kid in their classroom, then that's an amazing win for me too.
I think one thing I'm taking away from it is start with what you're good at.
Yep.
I'm going to write that on my bulletin board here in my office. I like that. I like that sentiment, and it's positive. It's a positive step forward. Like looking at the 5%. We hear about all that other stuff all the time, and it's not like we're not working on all that other stuff. Of
Right.
course we are, but it's nice to focus on the positive. Well, that's going to be about it for our episode today. Thank you, Whitney, so much for
Absolutely.
joining us and sharing the Opportunity Makers research and helping us really think about how we can create more, and let's repeat them, the belonging, the consistency, and the coherence in our schools. That's what we want. And I'll go back to that net analogy, it's a web. If we focus on what we're good at and fix that, it's going to reveal other things that we can work on and need to work on. And it's just going to be this snowball effect. One thing always seems to lead to another. If you're interested in learning more or accessing the tools mentioned today, check out the links in the episode description. And don't forget, there's a statewide virtual briefing coming in March. After all of the blogs and the other episodes in this series and all the other good things coming out. And I'm really excited about listening to the rest of this series. You can find this series and much more by searching for the Kinnel Podcast Network. That's KINL Podcast Network, wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll also post the video for this podcast on our YouTube channel. So like, follow, subscribe, and do all the things there so you don't miss a beat. And that does it for another episode of the Homegrown Podcast, where we talk about today's issues in education and help you be better tomorrow. Bye, everybody. Thanks again, Whitney.
Thank you.